They were called the families. They lived by a code older than the country itself, and for nearly a century, they ran America from the shadows. Every week, we open the files on the men who built the underworld, the bosses, the wars, the rituals, the betrayals, the blood oaths that bound them, and the secrets they swore to take to the grave. Subscribe. Some stories were never meant to be told.
The rise of Joe Massino. When the devastating fallout from FBI undercover agent Donnie Brasco's infiltration rained down on the underworld, a wave of indictments threatened to obliterate the Bonanno crime family. Tipped off in March 1982 that his own arrest for murder, conspiracy and racketeering was imminent, a shrewd capo named Joe Massino decided to vanish into the shadows. Knowing he had a much better chance of beating the charges if he didn't stand trial alongside the rest of the crew, Massino went on the lam, initially hiding out in the Hamptons before calling on his loyal protege, Dwayne "Goldie" Lisenheimer, to secure a safer refuge in the Poconos. Goldie, a blonde, non-Italian auto thief and chop shop specialist, had learned the dark arts of survival directly from Massino. Massino was a mastermind of counter-surveillance. He taught his crew to constantly check their mirrors, and he even turned the tables on the FBI by spying on the parking lots where federal agents swapped their unmarked vehicles. But even the most calculating mobsters can make breathtakingly foolish errors. While hiding in the Poconos under the alias Joe Russo, the elusive crime boss was actually caught shoplifting a bottle of aspirin worth less than $1. Miraculously, Massino managed to talk his way out of the petty theft charge, showing his fake identification to local police who had no idea they were holding a major mafia fugitive. Massino ultimately surrendered in 1984, strutting into the courtroom with a jovial, unruffled confidence that completely defied the typical snarling gangster stereotype. Dressed in off-the-rack suits, he joked in the hallways with his old FBI nemesis Pat Colgan and even snickered during prosecutor Laura Bravetti's presentation of a chart detailing moving company kickbacks, whispering that the corrupt firm actually owed him money. During the trial proceedings, Massino played the role of loyal protector, using his immense physical strength to pry open a phone booth to rescue his boss, Philip "Rusty" Rostelli, who was suffering an epileptic seizure. He also rushed to catch Rostelli's loafers when the ailing Godfather collapsed at the defense table. Watching the unstoppable, cunning trajectory of this former street thug, prosecutor Michael Chertoff aptly dubbed Massino the Horatio Alger of the Mafia. Behind the courtroom smiles, however, Massino was ruthlessly securing his empire. He ordered a hit on a capo named Gabriel Infandi for a litany of lethal blunders, botching the murder of Anthony Giliberti, clumsily disposing of the dismembered corpse of Cesar Bonventure in barrels, and committing the ultimate Cosa Nostra sin by casually talking and joking with FBI agent Pat Marshall. With Rostelli serving a massive prison sentence, Massino became the undisputed street boss, utilizing his brother-in-law, Salvatore "Good-Looking" Sal Vitali, as his primary proxy and messenger. Vitali pumped massive amounts of illicit cash into Massino's coffers by running Joker poker video machines, loan sharking, and extorting a catering company that supplied food to mobile snack trucks. When Massino finally returned to the streets after completing his own prison stint, he recognized that the traditional mafia playbook was a guaranteed death sentence. Furious that an FBI bug inside the Grand Avenue Social Club had recently decimated his ranks, Massino ordered the closure of all the family's social clubs, cutting off the government's favorite locations for electronic eavesdropping. To further insulate himself from informants, he completely decentralized the Borgata into highly secretive cells, ensuring that his capos operated blindly from one another and reported only to him through Vitali. Massino's massive ego and extreme paranoia dictated unheard-of new rules for his underworld army. Disgusted by former Godfather Joe Bonanno's tell-all autobiography and television interviews, Massino decreed that the family would no longer bear the Bonanno name, ordering his troops to refer to the syndicate exclusively as the Massino family. He also systematically stripped the romance and the physical evidence out of the sacred mafia induction ceremony. Terrified that the FBI might raid an initiation, Massino banned the use of guns, knives, and the burning of saints' cards, calculating that without those incriminating props, his men could simply claim they were enjoying a friendly game of cards. Finally, to ensure that no undercover agent like Joe Pistone could ever penetrate his family again, Massino mandated that any prospective recruit must have maintained a working relationship with a made man for at least 8 long years before being inducted. He was building a bulletproof, silent empire, step by paranoid step. The rise of Joe Massino, A crime syndicate's transformation. Step into the treacherous, high-stakes reign of a man who managed to pull the strings of an entire crime syndicate while posing as a harmless catering consultant. We are talking about Joe Massino, a boss so obsessed with secrecy and power that he attempted to erase decades of underworld history to protect his empire. In an unprecedented display of ego and paranoia, Massino decreed that his organization would no longer be known as the Bonanno clan, a title it had held for over 60 years. Disgusted by former Godfather Joe Bonanno's tell-all autobiography and television interviews, which he felt had disgraced the family and exposed Cosa Nostra secrets, Massino ordered his troops to refer to the syndicate exclusively as the Massino family. He also strictly forbade his capos and soldiers from uttering his proper name in conversations. Instead, mobsters were instructed to touch their ears when referring to their leader, earning him the fitting underworld moniker, the Ear. Massino's fixation on security completely transformed the family's daily operations. Following a disastrous FBI sting dubbed Operation Grand Finale, which bugged the Grand Avenue Social Club and led to numerous racketeering convictions, Massino ordered the closure of all the family's street clubs. To further insulate himself from informants, he decentralized the Borgata into highly secretive cells, ensuring that his senior capos operated blindly from one another and reported to him only through his brother-in-law, Salvatore Vitali. Massino even stripped the physical evidence out of the sacred Mafia induction ceremony, banning the use of guns, knives, and the burning of saints' cards. He calculated that without those incriminating props, his men could simply claim they were enjoying a friendly game of cards if the FBI ever burst into a room. Furthermore, to prevent another undercover infiltration like the infamous Donnie Brasco embarrassment, Massino mandated that any prospective recruit must have maintained a working relationship with a made man for at least 8 long years before being inducted. He also ordered his underboss to maintain a necrology list to ensure that rival families were not secretly padding their ranks by reusing the names of dead soldiers. But every mastermind needs a legitimate cover. To satisfy his parole requirements, Massino masqueraded as a consultant for King Caterers, a Farmingdale, Long Island, company that prepared hot dishes and snacks for mobile roach coach vendors. When he appeared at the massive catering plant once a week, he usually passed the time playing cards, armed with the cover story that he was there to prepare a succulent sauce for the company's products. When a New York Times reporter caught up with the genial kingpin at the plant, Massino boldly brushed off allegations that he was the newest godfather. "I don't believe there is such a thing as the Mafia," he claimed with a smile, insisting he was just a legitimate businessman who had paid his dues. Behind the scenes, however, law enforcement was constantly probing his defenses. FBI agents like Linda Vecchio and Jack Stubing liked to play head games with Massino, dropping by to gauge his reactions and deliver warnings. During one such visit, a jovial Massino joked with the agents, even apologizing to Stubing for shaking him during a recent car surveillance. Massino claimed the evasive maneuver was just an accidental abrupt turn to drop off his wife, but the agents walked away marveling at his encyclopedic memory for law enforcement vehicles and his undeniable desire to show off how smart he was. While putting on this genial public face, Massino was raking in fortunes. His administration relied on capos like Anthony T.G. Graziano, who operated as an acting consigliere to oversee a massive cocaine distribution network, a lucrative loan sharking business, and a vast stock of illegal joker poker video machines. Massino's rule was absolute, extending to ruthless internal purges when he felt his authority was questioned. When Capo Gerlando George from Canada Sciascia was murdered, Massino ordered a huge turnout of over 40 wise guys at the wake to flaunt his pretended grief and mislead the rest of the family. In reality, Massino later admitted to a favored captain that Sciascia deserved to die for trying to tell him how to run the family. The boss even considered it a piece of work well done when he learned that Sciascia had bled to death in a car, casually offering to reimburse the vehicle's owner from the family treasury to replace the blood-stained upholstery. Through relentless cunning, forced isolation, and brutal discipline, the Ear successfully rebuilt a fractured crime family into a highly lucrative and terrifyingly silent empire. The fall of the Bonanno crime family. Step right into the glitzy, high-stakes era of the 1990s, where the Bonanno crime family abandoned the gritty alleys for the gleaming towers of Wall Street and the lucrative asphalt of Manhattan parking lots. But greed leaves a paper trail, folks, and the impenetrable fortress built by Joe Massino was about to be dismantled not by gun-toting G-men, but by a pair of relentless FBI forensic accountants and a millionaire civilian who just couldn't resist the deadly allure of the mob. For years, Massino had insulated himself from the law, but FBI agents Jeffrey Salat and Kimberly McCaffrey decided to follow the money. Their crosshairs locked onto Massino's brother-in-law and underboss, Salvatore good-looking Salvatali. Vitali had relocated to the upscale suburbs of Long Island, where he and his associates were running a slick money laundering operation through a European-American bank branch in Melville. The FBI accountants caught them making convoluted deposits and transfers just under the $10,000 threshold to dodge Treasury Department currency transaction reports. Ironically, while the feds were closing in, Vitali was being frozen out by his own boss. Massino had been systematically stripping Vitali of his power, coldly informing him that the family's capos detest you. Massino resented Vitali's swelling vanity. He felt his underboss was acting like a big shot, mimicking John Gotti's flashy style, and he was deeply suspicious of Vitali's refusal to bring his own sons into the Cosa Nostra life. Banished from the family's inner circle, a bitter Vitali was forced to operate his own loan sharking and gambling rackets out on Long Island. Meanwhile, other Bonanno heavyweights were discovering the magic of the booming stock market. Capo Frank Coppa realized early on that Wall Street likes muscle and wants to do deals with the Mafia. Using his underworld reputation, Coppa orchestrated massive pump-and-dump stock frauds, hoarding millions in cash and gold in safe deposit boxes while living a lavish lifestyle fueled by cocaine and expensive real estate. He dragged his lifelong friend, Frank Lino, into the financial schemes, even though Lino was so ignorant of Wall Street vocabulary that his own defense lawyer later joked he didn't even know where Wall Street was. Both men eventually took the fall, with Lino catching a 57-month prison sentence for extortion and stock manipulation. With top earners going down, Massino elevated Richard Cantarella to acting underboss. Cantarella had a secret weapon, a wealthy parking lot broker named Barry Weinberg. Weinberg was the ultimate mafia groupie. Raised in a middle-class Jewish family in Brooklyn, Weinberg was mesmerized by the Cosa Nostra mystique and longed to be accepted by the tough guys. Weinberg took Cantarella under his wing, teaching the mobster how to illegally skim taxes from parking lot cash fees. In exchange, Weinberg got the thrill of hanging out with made men in Little Italy and using the Bonanno name to intimidate his business rivals. But playing with the mob has a steep price. Cantarella continuously squeezed his willing victim, ultimately extorting $800,000 from Weinberg in payments that the delusional businessman disguised as loans on his checks. The FBI's forensic accountants, however, were tearing through the family's financial facade. Salad and McCaffrey uncovered that Massino and Vitali were laundering their illicit cash by claiming fraudulent lottery winnings on their tax returns. The agents also placed the mafia groupie, Weinberg, under the microscope, trailing him to his Manhattan parking lots and his sit-downs with Cantarella. Confronted by the FBI with the prospect of going to prison, the millionaire broke. In an unprecedented triumph, the Bureau flipped Weinberg and his business partner, Agostino Scozzari, turning them into undercover operatives who began secretly taping Cantarella's every word. The walls came crashing down in October 2002. Armed with the secret tapes and old wiretaps, the FBI arrested Cantarella on 24 racketeering counts, including the decade-old murder of Robert Perino, a corrupt accomplice at the New York Post. Facing life behind bars, Cantarella defected to the government. But the most devastating blow to Massino's empire came from the man who had pioneered the family's Wall Street scams, Frank Coppa. Shattering Bonanno history, Coppa became the family's first made man to flip. To save himself, Coppa handed the government an eyewitness account of the brutal basement execution of Capo Sonny Black Napolitano, pointing the finger directly at Joe Massino as a key participant. The impenetrable fortress had finally cracked, brought down by paper trails, wire-wearing groupies, and the ultimate betrayal of the Mafia's most sacred oaths. The walls were finally closing in. The walls were finally closing in on the last of the New York Godfathers. Joe Massino, a master at sniffing out the most subtle tales, knew he was under siege. Ever paranoid, he had installed closed-circuit video cameras around his Howard Beach home, giving him panoramic views of the street, and those cameras confirmed what he already suspected. Federal agents were staked out right near his front door. Fearing that Massino might try to flee using hideaways established during his overseas trips, George Hanna, the Bonanno squad supervisor, had ordered a relentless 24-hour vigil. The inevitable knock came at 6 a.m. on January 9, 2003, just one day shy of Massino's 60th birthday. When 3 FBI C-10 squad members, an IRS agent, and a state police detective arrived, they found Massino already up, fully dressed, and waiting for them. He wore a pocketless black velour jogging suit and carried absolutely no possessions, no money, not even a wristwatch, fully aware that any valuables would be stripped from him in the federal detention lockup. His wife, Josie, watched silently in her bathrobe from the kitchen table as agents read her husband his Miranda rights. Massino's legendary photographic memory and coolness under pressure were on full display that morning. FBI forensic accountants Kim McCaffrey and Jeff Sallet, the agents who had doggedly pursued the paper chase that ultimately trapped him, were part of the arrest team. Despite never having spoken to him before, Massino instantly recognized them, stating, "You must be Kimberly and you must be Jeffrey." When McCaffrey asked why he was up so early, Massino joked, "I was on my way to the pastry shop. I thought you were coming yesterday. I saw surveillance cars in the area." Asked later how he knew the agents' names, Massino pointed out their use of Barry Weinberg as a wired informant, grinning as he told them, "You do your homework, I do mine." During the ride to FBI headquarters in Lower Manhattan for processing, Massino correctly predicted he would be held without bail and acknowledged the betrayal of his former captain, saying, "Frankie Copa got to work quick." When agents informed him he would be charged as a planner and backup shooter in the infamous 1981 murder of Capo Sonny Black Napolitano, Massino fired back, "That was a long time ago. I had nothing to do with it." Even while being processed, his sharp wit remained intact. Upon being introduced to Nora Conley, the C-10 squad second-in-command, Massino quipped, "That's similar to the underboss." But the most devastating maneuver of the day, a brilliant stroke of psychological warfare, was reserved for another man arrested that morning, Massino's own brother-in-law and titular underboss, Sal Vitali. Vitali was already on bail and under house arrest awaiting sentencing for loan sharking and money laundering, expecting a modest sentence of less than 4 years, but a new set of RICO convictions would essentially guarantee the 55-year-old would spend the rest of his life behind bars. After Vitali was processed on the FBI's 26th floor, agents McCaffrey and Sallet played their ultimate divide-and-conquer card. They handed Vitali the legal memorandum prepared for Massino's bail hearing, which prosecutors were set to present to a judge that afternoon. Within those pages lay a bombshell revelation. Prosecutors explicitly stated they possessed evidence that Massino believed Vitali was a deserter and an informer, and that the Godfather was ready to have his own brother-in-law killed. "You have to make a decision," Sallet told him as Vitali absorbed the chilling words in the court document. "There are a couple of ways to go." Vitali sat as silent as a stone. But as McCaffrey looked into his dear eyes, she saw the whirling, devastating emotions of a man grappling with the ultimate betrayal, a lifetime of loyalty repaid by a crime boss and family member who fully intended to have him whacked. In that heavy moment, McCaffrey knew exactly what was running through Vitali's mind. "Sal," she thought, "knows it's the end of the line." The fall of the last Don, Joe Massino's betrayal. Picture the scene in a Brooklyn federal courtroom. The man the press had crowned the last Don, Joe Massino, waddles in wearing a black warm-up suit, looking completely unruffled despite the staggering weight of the government's charges against him. The prosecution had just dropped a massive RICO indictment on his head, highlighted by the ruthless, 22-year-old assassination of Capo Sonny Black Napolitano. But Massino was cool, calm, and collected, likely because he knew the government's fatal weakness: they didn't have a single wiretap recording of his voice implicating him in any crime. The feds were relying entirely on the word of mobster turncoats like Frank Copa and Richard Cantarella, career criminals whose testimony Massino figured his high-priced lawyers could easily shred to pieces on cross-examination. But Massino's impenetrable fortress was about to crumble from the inside out, triggered by a catastrophic miscalculation. For years, Massino had systematically mistreated and alienated his brother-in-law and fiercely loyal underboss, Salvatore Vitali. When FBI forensic accountants warned Vitali that Massino was plotting to have him killed, the humiliated underboss made a decision that would shatter the Bonanno family forever. Vitali fired his attorney with a hand-delivered letter and defected to the government, unspooling 3 decades of closely guarded mafia secrets. Vitali's earth-shattering betrayal triggered an absolute avalanche of defections, a true domino effect that tore through the underworld. When Capo Franklino got the news of Vitali's treachery, he realized he was doomed. With Vitali backing up Copa's testimony, Lino knew he would be convicted of Sonny Black's murder, so he decided to flip, too. The panic was contagious. Joey D'Amico warned his crew, "Go home, hug your kids, you're probably going to jail," before he secretly called the FBI, pleaded guilty to 4 murders, and became the very first made man in Bonanno history to wear a wire against his own family. Even Dwayne "Goldie" Leisenheimer, a loyalist whom Massino had mentored since he was a teenager, flipped after FBI agents knocked on his door and reminded him of his involvement in the notorious 3 Capos massacre. By the time Massino's trial began in May 2004, the prosecution had assembled a devastating coven of 7 high-ranking mafia defectors to testify against him. The courtroom morphed into a theater of bitter family tragedy. In the front row sat Joe Massino, Joe's wife and Sal Vitale's sister, staring absolute daggers at her brother as he took the witness stand to destroy her husband. When the defense attorney asked Vitale to identify Massino in the courtroom, Sal's contempt was palpable as he pointed and snapped, "Yeah, the gentleman right there with the glasses. The guy who's staring at me. That's him." The trial was a gruesome, 9-week retrospective of late 20th century mafia culture, featuring 78 witnesses and over 300 exhibits. It took the jury just 5 days to return a crushing verdict, guilty on 11 counts and 51 specific racketeering acts. The judgment stripped Massino of his freedom and demanded the forfeiture of $10.4 million of his illicitly gained wealth, including his beloved Maspeth restaurant, the Casablanca. But the most jaw-dropping twist in this bloody saga came after the gavel fell. Staring down a life sentence and the horrifying realization that his empire was gone, the man who had ordered execution simply because underlings spoke to the FBI did the unthinkable. The seemingly iron-willed last Don broke the sacred oath of omerta. In a desperate bid to save his own skin and secure a pass to someday walk the streets again, Joe Massino became a government informer, cementing his legacy as the first official boss of a New York crime family to turn into a rat.